Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Friends and Family Weekend Saturday morning. How many of you were here yesterday and did a lot of stuff last night? Great. I know that I see a lot of familiar faces at the, we didn't really have a check-in, but a welcome desk at Peresky. Really happy that to see you all here this morning, and with all of the wonderful events going on, that you chose to come here to learn from and about our wonderful faculty who spend so much time with your students. So again, I'm Rachel Buchantz. I'm the Senior Associate Dean of Students, for those of you who didn't speak with me yesterday. Your students are on an incredible journey of self-discovery and intellectual fireworks. Our Williams professors come to class each day with the mission of guiding your students further along on that journey of discovery. Hopefully today with our panel, you'll get a taste of that experience. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce our panel to you, and then I'm going to turn it over to them. We have Nelly Rosario on the far left, Chair and Associate Professor of Latino Studies. She's the author of the novel Song of the Water Saints, winner of a PEN Open Book Award, and author of many other notable publications. Professor Rosario will discuss how students have exercised interdisciplinarity in her courses on fiction, DNA studies, and archival storytelling. Sarah Dubow, Professor of History, will be talking about different approaches she's taken to and experiences she's had with teaching controversial and painful issues in history courses. She specializes in modern U.S. history with a particular focus on gender, race, and the law, and on women's history. And she's been at Williams since 2007. David Tucker Smith, Chair and Halvorsen Professor of Distinguished Teaching and Research of Physics, will discuss collaborative faculty-student science research at Williams, focusing on examples from the Department of Physics and Astronomy. So as you can see, we've got folks from each of the divisions, and now I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Hi, folks. It's great to see you, and I hope you're having a great family and friends weekend. So this semester, I'm teaching a sophomore level physics course on electricity and magnetism, and I particularly have been enjoying the Wednesday and Thursday afternoon labs. Actually, leading those labs is a task that would probably be delegated to graduate students if we were at a large research university. But for me, it's a wonderful opportunity to really get to know my students very well and to have those one-on-one and small group conversations that can really be tailored to the needs of individual students and that I think can really spark student interest and enthusiasm. So building in those sorts of opportunities for individualized instruction is a really important part of the way we teach our courses. I want to give you one more quick example about that. This semester, my physics colleague, Kate Jensen, is teaching our advanced mechanics course in tutorial format. So what that means is that Kate is meeting with the over 20 students in that course in pairs every week for an hour or more to hear the students present their work at the blackboard. So the students are presenting each week. And that, I think, is another format that is really ideal in terms of being able to meet students where they are and also in terms of generating those conversations that allow students to get a much better understanding of the material. In my department, which again is the Department of Physics and Astronomy, but really across the science at Williams more broadly, some of the teaching actually occurs in research labs, which can therefore sort of function in part as additional classrooms. So many of our majors do get involved in research at some time during their Williams careers, and in that context, they receive a different type of individualized instruction that I think really complements what they get from their coursework. The research environment can provide great opportunities for open-ended inquiry and for development of different types of technical and problem-solving skills. And our research students also get exposed to topics and subfields that may not be part of the standard physics or astronomy undergraduate curricula. So I'd like to give you some examples about that, and I'm going to focus on examples from my department, physics and astronomy, but the idea of having a component of teaching through research is certainly widespread throughout the sciences and beyond the sciences at Williams. So I want to start by telling you about the work of my colleague Graham Giovanetti. Graham is an experimental physicist involved in searches for dark matter. And Williams students are a big part of that effort. Nobody knows what dark matter is exactly. So far, we've only learned about it through various astronomical observations. So for example, seeing how things seem to be orbiting at the edges and beyond the edges of galaxies. And those observations seem to be telling us that there's way more dark matter than ordinary matter, actually, the stuff we know and love, the stuff that makes us, the Earth, the sun, stars, all the visible stuff in galaxies and so on. So Graham and his collaborators are trying to directly detect interactions of dark matter with ordinary matter in the laboratory. So the idea is, suppose the dark matter comes into their vat of liquid argon and smacks into an atom. It will deposit some energy that they can detect, and that's a signature, so to speak, that they're looking for. He's part of a really big team building a dark matter experiment at Gran Sasso, Gran Sasso is an undergraduate physics research facility in Italy, and 4 Williams undergraduates worked on that project at Gran Sasso this summer, while other Williams students worked in Graham's on-campus lab at Williams, where R&D for future dark matter searches is being conducted. So I think one thing that students find exciting about all this, in addition to the science itself, is getting to work in a team environment and the energy that brings. Also, I think that they benefit from a broadened perspective on what it means to do science, and they gain confidence in their abilities when they see that they can make real contributions to a project like that. That's, of course, in addition to the exposure to new science content that they likely have not seen in their courses. I want to tell you now about the work that my colleague Catherine Kellifer does. She's another experimental physicist who has done a lot of amazing work in her lab with students. Her research subfield is called ultrafast optics and/or ultrafast electron diffraction. Take your pick. But imagine, if you will, zapping a very narrow filament of, say, tungsten with a very short laser pulse. So you're zapping the metal with the laser pulse. And the laser pulse lasts less than a millionth of a second. If you can accomplish this very difficult task, you can induce very short pulses of electrons to be emitted from that filament. And it turns out that those short electron pulses can be used to do amazing things. In particular, they can be used to provide snapshots of time-dependent structural dynamics as they occur at the atomic level in materials. Getting all this to work is an incredibly rich technical endeavor, and Catherine's research students have played an important part of that work every step of the way. They've gotten tons of valuable training in advanced laboratory techniques in the process. Ultrafast optics, definitely not a standard undergraduate physics topic, so Catherine's lab program really enhances the breadth of what our department can offer. And in fact, Catherine's been thinking about how she might incorporate some of the very cool techniques and tools from her lab into our course curriculum, and I think that would be very interesting. Along similar lines to that, our department did not offer a course on material science until Kate Jensen, our experimental materials scientist, created one, which we'll be offering next spring. It's a course that explores, among other things, many of the phenomena that Kate and her students study in her lab. So yes, we absolutely do need to teach those core physics courses that you'll find in any undergraduate physics curriculum. And those courses are important and we love them, but it's great when our research interests and activities feed into course electives that broaden the scope of our curricular offerings. Kate's research, by the way, focuses on soft materials. Among other things, she's interested in the science, as she would say, of the squishy and the sticky. And there's really a dizzying variety of projects going on in her lab with lots of students involved, including collaborative work on plant biophysics with folks in the biology department. Actually, I was recently at a talk given by one of Kate's current thesis students, Sarah, who's an Allison Davis Research Fellow. And I don't know how they came to be doing these experiments, but Sarah has been dropping, I think, food coloring into milk. And astonishingly, what sometimes happens if the conditions are appropriate is instead of the food coloring just sort of spreading in a blob, a starburst is produced, like, you know, a colorful star with a very point, you know, 4 or 5 points coming out. And it's a complete mystery why and under what conditions this occurs, and they're trying to figure that out. So it's really amazing. On a very different scale, I think I'm running out of time, but I wanted to tell you about the research of Anne Jascott, who works with real stars. She's an astronomer who studies various aspects of galaxies, how they evolve, and in particular, the conditions under which galaxies can emit the copious, high-energy ultraviolet light that was responsible for something called the reionization phase of the universe 1 billion years after the Big Bang. In case you've lost track, astronomers tell us we're currently at 14 billion years after the Big Bang, so this was like a baby universe. And Anne studies rare, relatively nearby galaxies whose properties make them really similar to those, you know, baby universe galaxies to try to get a better understanding of the detailed mechanisms behind that emission of really high energy ultraviolet radiation. So students who work with her do cutting edge astronomy using data from James Webb Space Telescope, Hubble Space Telescope, and many other instruments. This spring, Anne is teaching an observation intensive course using instruments on campus, actually, titled Between the Stars, the Interstellar Medium. And the course has a very broad scope that will be informed in part by her research. I'll just say, in addition to bragging about my younger, very talented colleagues, I do some teaching and research as well. I research theoretical particle physics and cosmology, so I don't have a lab. I have computers and blackboards. And a long-standing mystery in my field is actually why there's stuff today. Because according to our current best model of particle physics, it's something called the Standard Model, particles and antiparticles should have essentially annihilated away in the early moments after the hot Big Bang, leaving only radiation behind. Now, that's obviously not what happened. So our best guess is that there were new particles that we haven't yet discovered which affected the kinds of particle reactions that were taking place at the birth of the universe, leading to the asymmetry between matter and antimatter that survives to this day. So for the past few years, my students and I have been studying different theories of matter-antimatter asymmetry and how they can be tested at the Large Hadron Collider and other experiments. And through these projects, my students learn essential concepts in cosmology and particle physics, which again are subjects that are not, that are often neglected in the undergraduate curriculum. Williams physics majors have made significant contributions to our studies, and next spring, I'll be very excited to be teaching our particle physics elective, a course that I created after I arrived at Williams. Okay, that gives a very incomplete sampling of some of the collaborative work with students going on in physics and astronomy at Williams. It's a fun community to be a part of because the students are really wonderful, and also because of the breadth of exciting teaching and research going on.
Hi, everyone. I'm just happy that you're all here on a Saturday morning. So it means a lot to see so many of you here. So for me, I actually was not trained in Latino studies. I was trained in civil and environmental engineering. And then then I came to writing, and I became a writer. And I'm interested in narratives. I'm interested in narrative structures, narrative as a sort of construct, the architectures of narrative, and so that's sort of the approach I take to Latino studies. I'm actually also the only senior faculty that is full Lats, right? So the program really, we have a historian, we have a geologist, we have an art historian, and we have media studies, so it's by nature an interdisciplinary discipline. And so the courses I teach 2 courses on archives. So one is around archival storytelling. How do we activate, right, these artifacts? Also, one on archives and democracy, and thinking about what the sort of omissions, inclusions, histories of archives, sort of the democracy of archives, thinking about the effective roles, right? Who are the users, who are the record keepers, who are the archivists, who are the communities that engage these archives, and who are the subjects, right? And really thinking about radical empathy around how we sort of curate these archives, create them. What is an archive, right? Thinking about different archival methods, but also forms. A building can be an archive, DNA is an archive, fiction. So we sort of look at all these different, have these different conversations, and I always think like, it's almost like all the courses, they may sort of be specific in terms of subject matter, but I sort of use a lot of the same materials and sort of like to see how they move through these different disciplines. So the main courses I teach is, for example, Latina identities, constructions, constatations, and expressions. And it's a foundational course in Latino studies. It's always co-taught. So what's great about that course is that we bring in sort of, the students get to sort of play with different methodologies, think about different methodologies. So for example, I'm teaching this semester paired with Professor Kevin Cruz Amaya, who's an art historian. So it's very interesting to look at Latino history through art, right? Through, say, Chicano art. Sort of, we think about ways to sort of enter the histories through alternate archives, because often histories are not, there aren't always certain infrastructures set up. For example, we looked at, an indigenous writer, Dylan Miner, who looks at the communities, say, in Michigan and sort of repositions the border when we talk about, Chicanx art histories, right? We don't think about the northern border. We don't think about the Chicano experience up north. So sort of repositioning that, and because there's an absence of archival material about that community, art is, you see it in street art, and sort of that's the way that experience is archived, and we look at it through that lens. Actually, one of the exercises and one of the assignments for that particular class, we had students sort of intervene or interrupt an object and make it legible for Latino studies, right? And a lot of those sculptures will be displayed for the Dia de los Muertos, an altar that's going to be set up in Sawyer. There are going to be sort of sibling altars for Day of the Dead at Mass MoCA and also at Sawyer Library. So the students were able to sort of really think and work through the readings, taking an object and sort of reworking it in different ways. So it's very interesting to see the kinds of work that the students brought in. I also teach a fiction course. Sometimes I teach it as a workshop, and this semester I'm teaching it as a literary course, right? So we look at fiction through various lenses, through Latinx cultural scripts and values. For example, the students' midterm just last week, they presented they sort of presented as a group, and we looked at the stories through Jungian archetypes, right? So get the students to think through how these archetypes can be activated through fiction. Another exercise I love is using a sort of very seminal revolutionary paper in anthropology, The Body Ritual Among the Nasarima by Horace Minor. It's a 1956 paper that sort of a bit of a spoof, but getting students to sort of think outside of their own experience and try to see their experience sort of from a very kind of distant perspective. Also, maybe 2 weeks ago, this is sort of a big moment for me. One of my favorite stories is The Letitian Age by Dominican writer Yalitza Ferreras. And it's sort of what the story tries to do is to inscribe the narrator, who is sort of this Afro-Latina girl growing up in Washington Heights, and she's trying to inscribe herself into the pantheon of white geologists. So the whole story is about her obsession with rocks and rock formations in Earth. And so I email Jose Constantin from the Geosciences. I'm like, please, Jose, come to the class, read this story. It's going to be a surprise for Yalitza. That was her dream, to be a geologist. And so he was like bowled over when he read that story. He'd never read a story like that. And they had a conversation, and she was so excited, So it was kind of interesting to see these two sort of scholars, kind of the road not taken conversation. So that was really fun. So in terms of the archival courses, one of the things I love about that course is that I call it finalish project. I hate saying final, but students actually produce collections that become part of Sawyer. They sort of archive with the school. Some students have done, for example, we had Sisterhood Archives. There was a student who sort of looked at this sort of sisterhood of Black women at Williams and documented the history. So she gathered all the Google Docs, and we really got a history of this project that is about almost going on, I think, 8 years, I'm not sure. But you can actually find them in digital collections at Williams. We also had another student document minority coalitions at what cost, Black representation in the arts. And we've had guest speakers from Arab studies and Africana studies. So thinking about how archives, for example, disappeared in Morocco, right? So just ways to think about the archives that governments keep versus the types of archives that maybe the Global South, alternate archives like Testimonio, family photographs, quipus, right? Just the ways in which we document that may not fit within the construct of, say, state archives. Some of the storytelling projects are also really exciting. We had 2 students create a website where they documented the work of Alberto Sandoval Sanchez, who actually taught here as visiting professor, sort of did a lot of work around HIV activism and public health. So they were able to sort of collect a lot of his papers, digitize them, and create a website, which is still up. We also had other students interview Latinx alumni, those who participated in the hunger strike in the 90s, and actually led to the creation of the Latinx Studies Project. There was a student from China who was a computer programming major, and I remember her coming into the office. She really wanted to do this project, but she didn't know what. So we try to get to sort of what were the things. I always say, what's your itch? Like, what's itching in your brain right now? And for her, it was this concept of constitution. Like, what is a constitution? And so as the more we talked, she decided, I said, well, what's your big question? She goes, I wonder what an Uber constitution would look like. So her final project was using AI. She created a computer program that sort of scrapes the internet for all the constitutions ever written and sort of amalgamates like all these values and see if there's a way to produce an Uber, which I thought was brilliant. And of course, it's a prototype because she couldn't figure out issues of translation. She couldn't figure out magnitudes and scales. Are we looking at countries? Are we looking at like student groups? And I said, you know what? The point is, walk away with this project. You have a prototype, and you can work on this for the rest of your life if you want. But the idea is to get them started on something that they can then return to. And actually, the final is structured as a sort of grant proposal. I said, you can make money with this. So they have to write their methodology, they have to do an annotated bibliography, and then offer a prototype as part of their final. In the DNA plus Latinx course, we really think about the implications of DNA research, not just on identity. And it's funny, most of the students there are not interested in like 23andMe, but we do think about data, like how do these companies, basically they're selling you a story, right? The buy-in is you need a narrative for your own identity, right? But we also look at surveillance, we look at medicine, we think about CRISPR, gene editing, blood quantum, so we borrow from indigenous studies and talk about how this question of blood quantum even affects what if you're not 16% Cree? Like, are you gonna get that scholarship because you fell off, like you're at 15%, right? So we talk about all these issues, and I really invite students to draw from their own skills, their majors. So students write, DNA poetry, like using the nucleotides. We look at, we actually do an exhibit at Sawyer Library during DNA Day. So I usually teach it in the spring. So April is like, DNA week, and we have them design, like just do installations. So students have done really, really cool projects, data visualizations, AI composites, right? Dance pieces. I was a student who was in dance and created a sort of DNA dance, And in that particular class, one time I had a student, this was early on, I had a visually impaired student, and that student really changed. I mean, how do you explain DNA to someone who is almost like 90% visually impaired? So we actually ordered a DNA model that was built for the visually impaired, and it was very textured. And what they did, the student basically analyzed, I mean, we actually reviewed it in class, and I had them send the review to the makers. They said that this model was actually created by, people who had no visual impairments, because even the description of the textures, right, were just the language was very difficult to grasp. So that's one of the ways in which that student, for example, contributed. I started using podcasts. So I started using different kinds of materials instead of readings. And for their final project, that student actually wrote a play with the nucleotides in conversation, right? Representing, the nucleotides is like different characteristics personified, right? So that's one of the projects. So we look at graphic novels. During the pandemic, I was teaching that course during the pandemic, and I actually like to teach for the students. One of the first readings is actually a graphic narrative that teaches students how DNA works. So a lot of students who say, I'm not a STEM person, they really got into it. And when the pandemic hit, a lot of students said how important that book was for them. So I think most people don't really know how DNA and RNA work and transcription and all these things. So it was good for the students to sort of have that background. And then finally, I teach a graphic narrative course. Students have produced zines out of that course. We look at memoirs, we look at graphic medicine, we look at all different ways. Actually, there's one book, Drawing Democracy by the Center for Democratic Studies. And then students actually, right here at the 62 Center, had an exhibit a few years ago based on a photo blog that they created online on Instagram called Demos Arte. And it's sort of like a Humans of New York, right? And they would go around campus in the community and interview people and ask them, what does democracy mean? And you'd be surprised, most people, it's very difficult to define democracy. So they actually printed out some of the posts, and they were exhibited here in the building. So they read, Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. We look at Stud Terkel's Working, a graphic adaptation. And yeah, so it's been really a great sort of, I've gotten to know students through their work. Students have learned from each other, and really we try to really draw on each other in the unit, in the program, to come into our courses as guests, guest speakers, and bring some of their methodological practices with them. The other thing for the DNA class, I just wanted to say, a lot of students have never crossed over to the science side. So one of the things that we do in that course, we actually do a DNA extraction. So they have to bring apples and blueberries, and then we cross over, and they're so excited. They've never been in a lab. Then we get to eat the fruit afterwards. So yeah, the idea is really to get students moving throughout the campus, not just physically, but also in terms of disciplines and theoretically. So thank you.
So I guess we can take some questions at this point.
Our kids are very lucky to be studying with all of you. And these were such different presentations, but all fascinating and engaging. I have two weird little questions. One question is, what is graphic medicine? It sounds interesting. I just don't know what it is. And the other is, some of us have heard that, there's a lot of tension on campuses around the country around the war in the Middle East. And I've heard that there is less here, that not that passions run high, there's strong and conflicting opinions, but I'm wondering, Professor Duval, if some of the lessons that you shared from your class in terms of, that you give students a heads up, that you give them a safety valve, that they need to step out, are there tools that you're teaching in your particular class that seem, and also maybe I'm not hearing correctly, maybe there is more overt and disruptive conflict on campus than we've heard about. But I'd love to hear how you see what's happening in Williams as a microcosm for these larger ideas of generative conversations and generous approaches to having strongly passionate differences in opinion.
I'm just going to try to repeat I'm not going to repeat the whole question, but it sounds like we want Sarah DeVoe to talk a little bit more about what's happening on campus with those difficult conversations, issues that might mirror what's happening in the world, and are there other tools that you're using beyond what you discussed? I know there was maybe more in there, but hopefully I captured that. And if there's anything else you want to add to that up here, it's fine. Do you want to say what graphic medicine is?
Oh, graphic medicine. I mean, it's sort of a public-facing way of describing medical concepts, and also narrative medicine is another such genre, thinking about ways, sort of the public-facing way of talking about disease. And I also wanted to answer, I was actually on sabbatical during, what was going on campus, but I do know that part of the Day of the Dead altar is to honor the victims, right, of all the conflict in the Middle East right now. So we're just trying to find also different ways of resistance. Like, resistance can look a lot of different ways. I think when resistance looks one way in the news, that's fine, but I think it's not an either or thing, really thinking through some of these different forms.
Give a chance to other people.
Yeah, sorry, this is a bit of a softer question. So I was kind of curious, thanks so much for the overview of your classes and the work that's coming out of your departments, but I was kind of curious about your thoughts on how your classroom differs from, say, a classroom at the PhD granting institution from which you come. So many of you have all kinds of doctorates. And probably taught in some of those classrooms. I assume that the Williams classroom is a bit different. And so, what is your teaching philosophy? What is your approach, and how has that changed over the time that you've been here? I don't think it's a soft question. You should have a canned answer for that. It's really for anybody.
The question is really, what's your teaching philosophy?
I'll take a quick stab at that. I think our mission in my department is to have as much kind of sort of personalized instruction with the students as we can, and sort of structuring things so that that's as possible as it can be. We still have lectures, and we try to make those engaging, more interactive, intentionally interactive than we probably did a couple of decades ago, for sure. But it's also about, as I mentioned, in labs, making ourselves very accessible for office hours and that sort of thing. Building in those opportunities to really deal with, professor to student, and having it be less anonymous. So if we're sort of doing what we say we're doing, it should be a lot less anonymous than at a larger research university. That's how I think about things.
So undergraduate, I went to MIT, and graduate went to Columbia. And I think one of the things I try to bring from those two institutions. I know at MIT this whole idea of like there's no such thing as a bad idea, right? And really push students to bring the knowledge they already possess. I think everyone has knowledge, and the possibility of making, knowledge creations, knowledge making. I like materiality. I like students to experiment. I think the spirit of experimentation. Like I tell my fiction students, if you're afraid to fail in my class, you're gonna fail. Because you have to make mistakes. You have to question your own ideas and question, you have to push, fall, break things, get messy. It's gonna look crappy the first draft, So I think I bring that's the spirit of experimentation. And also I tell students, you're not writing, if you're gonna hate write a paper, I'm gonna hate read it. So, if you're gonna AI write a paper, I'm gonna AI read it. Like, you're in conversation with these scholars. Like, just because you don't have a PhD or you don't even have your BA or whatever, you are thinkers. So bring it. Bring it. It may be faulty, and that's what we sort of take apart. So.
Maybe one more question?
I'm really interested. Well, first of all, thank you to all of you for giving us a view to your lab's review pedagogical approach. I'm really interested in your speaking of the archives, how you are intentionally making sure that the students know that the archives are not a static space, but are now moving into an idea of living bodies, living information. I know I'm old enough to know when they said archives, it seemed to be a dusty, static place. And so I'm very interested in how your approach of merging and like you said, this interdisciplinary type of approach of letting students know that archives are not only dealing with living information or information from folks who were living, but that it's a knowledge base that is still active.
So the question is related to archives and not being a static space and how those live and move and your work with that.
Yeah, one of the books we read in the DNA class is Alondra Nelson's The Social Life of DNA, and thinking about what are the different ways in which we archive, particularly, in Black communities, particularly like in, Latinx communities, indigenous communities. A building can burn, papers can burn, governments can shut down, institutions, right? So really thinking about ways in which, and this is why it needs to be interdisciplinary, right? How do we store information that's not just in a library or just digitized? How do we access them? One of the stories that one of the writers we talked about in Ficciones like 2 weeks ago was Mayra, the Afro-Puerto Rican writer Mayra Santos Febre, and one of the things she says is that the Caribbean, we need fiction writers because a lot of these institutions and infrastructures are not there for, Black communities. So the writers are the ones who are there in real time, right? And are documenting, some of these experiences. So it's sort of atomizing the information so it's not just in some building somewhere, right? How is it? It's in our food. I mean, it's in the way we braid our hair. It's like in what we call in Latino studies vivencias, right? La vida cotidiana, like the quotidian. That is where we archive. So really thinking alternatively about that. And I get students to do projects that way, go out there and find ways to capture that information in maybe alternate forms. And sometimes asking them to take the same information, show me in 3 different forms how you can, so that, the question of form, And then the other thing too, we talk about biology and taxonomy, like Latino studies is very hard in archival studies, like our names keep changing. Latinx, Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, So how do you create a taxonomy that's legible so that we can actually find the stuff that's in there, right? So thinking about language, we think about linguistics, we think about identities, et cetera. So there are a lot of ways to enter that.
So I know that we could probably go on forever with this, and I really appreciate all of our panelists being here today and for, again, you coming out on a Saturday morning for this. We do have another session with some folks on campus who are going to talk about the outside the classroom experience, and I think it's also a really great session, so if you're going to stay, please stay, but maybe you can stand up and take a stretch break. But really, thank you so much to these faculty.